Back in the early 1900s, every car came standard without a roof. Nearly every car in the 1950s and 60s seemed to offer a convertible top, but they were gone by the mid-70s, thanks to safety regulations that made a missing roof not such a good idea.
I think you got a hole in your muffler. What? I said I think you got a hole in your muffler.
But when convertibles made a return in the 1980s and beyond, there were some cars that were never originally designed to have a drop top, and yet, for reasons we may never understand, offered one anyway. Here are my top 10 picks of convertibles that truly never should have existed.
Damn it!
This is my old car.
A convertible for less than 10 grand? What a breath of fresh air.
Getting to know.
For my US-based viewers, if you are looking to sell your old car or searching for that special old car you once had, check out the My Old Car Exchange. Go to myoldcar.loma.tech and sign up today. I've included this link in the description below. A big thank you to Loma for creating and managing this site. As I write this in May of 2025, convertibles make up less than 1% of all new car sales in the US. To be clear, I am defining a convertible as a drop-top vehicle based on a car platform, not body-on-frame trucks such as the Ford Bronco, the Jeep Wrangler and Gladiator, or the GMC Hummer EV. The latter technically a unibody thanks to its Flora batteries, but clearly it wouldn't be mistaken for a car. Today's typical car-based convertible doesn't make much attempt to be a practical daily driver. Instead, the goal is to have fun driving it, and look good driving it. Today's cars that are offered with either a fixed roof or a drop top typically have the latter planned into the overall design from the start. But there was a time when it was not uncommon to see convertibles that were clearly an afterthought of the fixed roof version they were based on. Although this list is ordered by the year the convertibles were first offered for sale, and not by their magnitude of weirdness, you might think the latter is true when we get to the last three. Number 10. BMW Bauer 3 Series. When one thinks of classic BMW, the image of a convertible is likely to come to mind. However, when BMW introduced the E21 sedan and coupe, more commonly known as the 3 Series, in 1975, there was no convertible option, at least not one available from the same factory. Instead, BMW turned to the Bauer Carrosserie, or coach builder, to transform the 3 Series coupe into a convertible, although not a convertible in the conventional sense. Bauer had been around since 1910 and had designed and built car bodies such as the BMW M1 and Porsche 959. By the mid-70s, convertibles were getting a bad rap thanks to increasing public concern over the danger of rollovers. So Bauer took a page from the Porsche 911 Targa playbook and provided a way to offer open-top driving with less rollover risk, which was to leave the side windows and the roof rails surrounding them intact. The Bauer design, which they called the Top Cabriolet, or TC, offered multiple open-air options, tilting up or removing the piece above the front seat to create essentially a big sunroof, and also a fabric piece surrounding the plastic rear window that could be folded down and stacked above the trunk. Bauers were officially sanctioned BMWs that could be ordered from BMW dealers. The E21s offered the TC1, and then continued with the TC2 for the second-gen 3 Series, the E30. By 1987, partway through the E30's run, BMW offered their own convertible from the factory. But Bauer continued to offer their TC2 as a second convertible option. BMW didn't approve Bauer's TC3 version, as they preferred their own crazy sliding door Z1, so the final Bauer for the 3 Series, the TC4, was offered on the 4-door E36. More like a Landaulet than a true convertible, few people wanted them, leading to only about 300 built based on the E36. BMW never offered any Bauers directly to the US when they were new, but some of them did make their way here. This makes them as much a collectible these days as they are, well, weird.
A complete, finished 3 Series would turn up at their factory and then they would cut the roof off, because that's the best thing to do with a brand new car, is to take a big saw to it.
Number 9. AMC Eagle and Concorde Sundancer. In 1980, with their long-term future in serious doubt, American Motors needed something new and exciting to help bring in more customers to their showrooms. They saw how Toyota offered a convertible version of their compact Celica coupe, which was designed by Jack Griffith, a former Ford repair shop owner who had previously developed the TVR Griffith 200 sports car. In 1979, the second-gen Celica didn't have a factory-installed soft top, so Griffith designed a soft top for the rear portion of the roof and window, and a removable fiberglass panel above the front seats. This was similar to the BMW Bauer design, except that unlike the Bauer, there were no roof rails above the windows on the Celica. Instead, a reinforced basket handle design stretched across the widened B-pillars. Although Griffith only converted around 2,000 Celicas, its success was enough for Griffith to offer down-on-their-luck AMC the chance to do the same for their cars, and AMC jumped at the chance. In 1980, AMC offered the Concorde and Eagle, both cars sharing a similar architecture borrowed from the since discontinued Hornet. AMC hadn't sold a convertible since the Rambler Rebel in 1968, so having these almost convertibles were the next best thing. For AMC, instead of the name Sunchaser used on the Celica, the AMC versions were named Sundancer, and had the same fiberglass cover in front of the basket handle B-pillars, with a folding fabric around the plastic rear window. Only the limited trim models were used for the conversion, to help sell them as a top-end model. However, many of the conversions were bought directly from dealers, not from customers ordering them, just to offer something to lure in customers to the showrooms. Unlike the already sporty Celica, the far less sporty Concorde and Eagle simply didn't look right with the missing roof, and looked especially odd on the taller all-wheel drive Eagle. Only around 200 conversions were ever made, and that, along with the big three automakers starting to bring back their own factory-built convertibles, led to Griffith's company folding after the last Sundancer left his factory in 1982.
Now comes the highly enjoyable task of trying to fit the bag and the panel in the trunk, which also barely has enough room.
Number 8. Renault Alliance.
There's nothing like the Alliance convertible. Unmatched in looks, design, and excitement.
The failure of the Sundancer wouldn't be the last convertible for AMC, although technically this next entry is more French than American. Renault took a controlling share of American motors in 1979, and as a result, many of the products they sold were Renault models repackaged to sell in the US market. The 2- and 4-door Alliance and the similar 3- and 5-door Encore were marketed strictly for economy-minded buyers, with its base 1.4-liter 4-cylinder making just 64 horsepower. This was appropriate for its role as a Japanese import fighter. The Alliance, a name that literally came from its recent partnership with AMC. However, by 1985, sales of the Alliance were on a downward trend, no thanks to their own downward trend in quality and reliability, so AMC needed to do something to attract new buyers. Along with adding a sporty GTA model, the Alliance was now available as a convertible, and the top-end model offering both together marketed as the Renault GTA convertible, dropping the Alliance in the name. Unlike the previous 2 entries on this list, where the conversion to convertible meant cutting the top off after it left the factory, the Alliance convertible was built alongside coupes and sedans at AMC's Kenosha, Wisconsin plant, although with assistance from American Sunroof Corporation, or ASC, a name you'll hear again on upcoming entries in this list. But the car's poor quality reputation, not to mention lower gas prices leading to bigger car options for sale, helped seal its fate in 1987. Despite it once holding the title of Motor Trend's Car of the Year, Chrysler CEO Lee Iacocca ended the Alliance production when he bought out Renault's remaining shares that year.
Once the cover is snapped on, tuck in the flap behind the rear seat and you're ready to go. It's really as simple as it looks.
Number 7. Dodge Dakota.
While it looks like a roll bar, Chrysler is very careful not to call it that.
This next entry is the only pickup truck on this list, and I expect some of you may question why I didn't include other pickups, such as the Chevy K5 Blazer or original Ford Bronco, as they offered convertible versions. They were not included here simply because of my original conditions for being on this list. The Blazer and Bronco were designed to offer convertibles from the start. In fact, the first Bronco once offered a version that didn't even have doors. However, the Dakota was never planned to be anything but a fully enclosed mid-size pickup when it first entered production in 1986 for the 1987 model year.
North America's first mid-size pickup.
Dodge had a strong following for its full-size Ram pickups, but until the Dakota, they didn't have a decent competitor against the smaller Chevy S10 and Ford Ranger. Although the Dakota could be optioned cheap and simple, Dodge also offered upgraded models that gave it a bit more sporty look and feel, complete with Dakota Sport graphics on the doors. The idea for a convertible pickup first came from Jerry York, then the CFO of Chrysler, who saw homemade chop-top pickups in California and figured it made sense for Chrysler to offer one from the factory. And although the volume wouldn't be huge, it could attract people to the showrooms. That low volume meant it would be another good case for using ASC to do the conversions. Dropping the top meant you lost access to some of the truck bed, and it also required adding a roll bar, not so much for the structure, but to provide a place to mount the seat belts. In fact, Dodge avoided using the term roll bar to dissuade owners from testing them as such.
If you call it a roll bar, people may be encouraged to see if it works.
But alas, this unique idea didn't sell as well as Dodge hoped, as less than 3,000 were sold for 1989, and sales dropped by 2/3 the following year, resulting in its sad end with only 8 sold in 1991.
This idea was surely not supported by any market research or, well, rationality, frankly, but they did it.
Number 6. Yugo Cabrio. Yes, the same car that set the gold standard for automotive punchlines was once offered as a convertible, although so briefly, it is likely you've never seen one in person. The standard 2-door hatchback version began imports from Yugoslavia to the United States in 1985, thanks to the incredible persistence of Malcolm Bricklin. Bricklin imported the first Subarus to the U.S. in 1968.
Is the little Subaru really cheap and ugly?
Tried and failed with his self-named sports car, and the Fiat-designed Bertone X19. Those last two failures pushed Bricklin to try importing the cheapest car he could find, which led to the Yugo reaching U.S. shores in 1985.
Yugo, committed to building the toughest, most dependable cars a little money can buy.
Built by Zastava, a former Yugoslavian military arms manufacturer, it was heavily based on the Fiat 127 and 128.
Made by Zastava or Zastafa or... I don't know how you pronounce it.
And the standard hatchback Yugo GV's price started at just $3,990 US, at about half the cost of a Chevy Chevette. That's where the GV came from, as in great value. By 1987, 5 different variations of the Yugo were offered, including the upscale GVX, well, at least in comparison to the base model, leading to sales of over 48,000 that year alone.
Maybe, actually, it's suddenly dawned upon me that he isn't very bright.
But by 1990, the quality and reliability of the Yugo clearly showed why the car cost so little. It didn't help that war was breaking out in Yugoslavia, further hindering Bricklin's ability to continue exports to the US. To try boosting sales, a convertible version was offered, but to keep the price as low as possible, the ragtop still used the Yugo's 1.3 liter with a 2-barrel carburetor, not the fuel-injected version other Yugos had by that point, resulting in just 61 horsepower. Despite that, the convertible's list price was $8,900, more than double the cost of the hatchback. Although for that money, you got a glass rear window with an electric defogger. Of course, the running gag there was they had to offer that to keep your hands warm while you were pushing it. Only 500 convertibles were ever produced. Of less than 100 made it to the US before the war in Yugoslavia ultimately ended all imports in 1991. I know I saw one on display at the Detroit Auto Show in 1990, but I can't find any photos to prove it. If you still have one of these in good condition today, it probably is, believe it or not, worth far more than it ever was new. Number 5. Geo Metro.
Geo Metro convertible. Must be new. I didn't even know Geo had a convertible.
Just like the previous entry in this list, here's another example of hoping a drop-top option on a cheap little car could help boost sales. And also, just like the last one, it didn't really help here either. But unlike the Yugo, a few thousand of these were sold, so there is a better chance you might see one on the road today. The Geo Metro was one of 4 Japanese cars sold by GM under their new Geo brand, although if you lived in Canada, the same car was sold as the Pontiac Firefly. Or you could get the same car badge as a Suzuki Swift, although Suzuki badged it as the Cultus back in Japan. The Metro, Firefly, and Swift were built in Ontario in the Cami plant, which stood for Canadian Automotive Manufacturing Incorporated, and was, at the time, a 50-50 joint venture between GM and Suzuki, except not all Metros were built there. The convertibles were built in Japan, and were first available partway through the 1990 model year. Not only did the fabric top eliminate the practicality of the hatchback, it also lost the back seat, as the top folded up where the back seat once was. It still had a trunk, but much lower capacity than the hatchback had, and although the convertible is only available on the upscale LSI trim, yes, I said upscale here again, it still only had a 1-liter 3-cylinder engine and 13-inch wheels. It got 50 miles to the gallon, but only its very small size and small engine made that possible. The convertible cost over $11,000 US when new, nearly double what a strip-based Metro cost. With a peak of 16,000 sold in 1991, it had dropped to only 6,500 in 1993, the last year of that generation, and not surprisingly, the convertible didn't return in 94. Number 4. Mitsubishi 3000 GT Spider. This car is easily the most appropriate in this list to offer a convertible. What made it eligible for this list is that Mitsubishi decided to offer not a folding soft top, but instead a folding hardtop, on a car that hadn't been designed for it. They did it about a decade before the folding hardtop craze took off in the mid-2000s, making it the first production car to offer it since the 1959 Ford Fairlane 500 Skyliner. The 3000 GT was a joint effort with Chrysler, who sold their version as a Dodge Stealth, but Dodge never got the convertible. Instead, American Sunroof Corporation only did the conversion on the 3000 GT, and only 1,034 were ever built, at the tail end of its second generation, 1995 and 96. The 3000 GT Spider was offered in a front-wheel drive non-turbo version, called the SL, or the much more desired all-wheel drive 300 horsepower twin-turbo VR4, and 604 of the 1,034 Spiders built started with the VR4. The cheaper SL started at around $57,000 US, or around $113,000 today, so it was a hard sell, especially since the folding hardtop had no recent precedent to convince buyers it would be reliable long term. It also meant zero cargo space when the top was down, other than what you could fit in the tiny back seat, a far cry from what it had before as a hatchback. Yes, it made the car more weatherproof year-round, but the 3000 GT wasn't exactly a four-season car, even with all-wheel drive. The additional 400 pounds added to the car's weight negatively affected performance as well, especially when all that extra weight was above the rear axle. Despite the low sales, the 3000 GT Spider brought back interest in hardtop convertibles, a trend which appeared on several other cars for another decade or so. Number 3. Chrysler PT Cruiser.
How much don't you want that car?
Not long after Chrysler first sold their weirdest car ever, the Plymouth Prowler, and I'm allowed to make that claim since I own one, Chrysler followed up with it with a more practical option, although still weird in its own right.
Isn't that pretty? Oh, yes. Oh, God, yes.
First going up for sale in 2000, the PT Cruiser was supposed to be a Plymouth, but got switched to Chrysler when then owner, or partner, Daimler, deemed Plymouth unnecessary and scheduled it for shutdown in early 2001. Designed by Brian Nesbitt, who would later move on to design the similar-looking Chevy HHR, the PT was a huge hit, selling over 100,000 units each year for its first 6 years. It was even sold in Europe, although not nearly as popular there.
A hideous Chrysler PT Cruiser.
Unlike some other entries in this list, in which the convertible was added to the lineup to help boost sagging sales, the PT Cruiser was still selling well when Chrysler first offered the convertible in 2005.
But who cares if we blow it up, because it is, after all, crap.
Like the other hatchback models in this list, turning the PT into a convertible significantly limited its cargo carrying practicality. Although the rear seats could still fold down, gone was the hatchback door, replaced with a relatively tiny trunk and tiny door that made filling the now tiny space a bit awkward. The PT Cruiser, like the final 2 entries in this list, were originally designed to be 5-door hatchbacks, which meant removing 3 of those doors and making the remaining 2 doors longer to allow access to the back row, which couldn't have been inexpensive to engineer. Climbing into that back row was made more difficult thanks to the large basket handle fitted just behind the doors, necessary to recoup some of the body structure lost by the missing roof. The end result was a car whose proportions kind of looked like a minivan with the top chopped off.
You've sunk my cruiser.
Chrysler sold over 76,000 PT Cruiser convertibles, most of which during 2005 and 06, before the drop tops last year of 2008. Although that sounds like a high number compared to other cars in this list, the convertible only accounted for around 5% of all PT Cruisers ever sold.
Oh, I can't even look at it.
Number 2. Nissan Murano Cross Cabriolet.
The Murano Cross Cabriolet has the structural rigidity of an earthworm.
If the order of this list had been based strictly on the magnitude of weirdness, this car would have been number 1. The fact that Nissan spent so much time and effort to design and build something almost nobody asked for is even more sad now when you consider the financial hardship the company is currently in. So those extra resources maybe could have been used to build cars that actually would have benefited Nissan's bottom line. The Nissan Murano began its second generation in 2008, and like so many other crossovers around that time, it was based on a car platform shared with sedans, in this case the Nissan Altima and Maxima. Although being a somewhat generic upscale crossover in an ever-growing market, it was still one of Nissan's most popular models. But what would happen in 2011 surprised nearly everyone, thanks to, or should I say no thanks to, their CEO at the time, Carlos Ghosn. Yes, the same Carlos Ghosn who would be later convicted of financial fraud in Japan, and then escape prison with the help of a piano box. Instead of offering a Jeep-like drop top on a vehicle that could have pulled it off, such as the more rugged Pathfinder, Ghosn approved chopping the top off the more soccer mom-style Murano. Rumor has it that he commissioned it as a request from his wife, not by any focus group analysis, meaning the Cross Cabriolet was essentially built for an audience of 1. Like the PT Cruiser, the Murano's entire body structure from the windshield back had to be redesigned to compensate for the missing roof and to eliminate 3 doors, which in turn eliminated any utility from what some were still calling an SUV. Its tiny trunk lid sat higher than the bottom of the remaining doors, and what little trunk space existed was reduced even more when the top lowered. And then there was the price, with the standard Murano's price of around $30,000 US, ballooning to as much as $48,000 for the Cross Cabriolet. When the Murano was ready for its 3rd generation in 2015, the Cross Cabriolet thankfully didn't carry over. If I ever make a video on the stupidest cars ever made, I suspect this one will be number 1 on that list.
You can move the driver forward and backward, up and down, which is great if you want him to have an accident.
Number 1. Land Rover Range Rover Evoque.
That's pretty dang darn good.
So I'll admit this one really pushes the boundaries of what constitutes an old car, as the first of these models arrived only around 8 years ago as I'm writing this. but I had to include it as it also competes for the top spot with the Cross Cabriolet for overall weirdness. The Range Rover Evoque, in its original fixed-roof 3- and 5-door variants, was a unibody design, not body-on-frame, which veered sharply from the more rugged off-road designs typical of traditional Land Rovers. Although it still had 8 inches of ground clearance, its overall height was lower than typical Range Rovers, and looked more like an upscale mall hopper for suburbanites. This demographic, along with the fact that it was also offered as a 3-door model, made it the best candidate for any Land Rover to be transformed into a convertible. But that 3-door version was a poor seller, and although it was available from 2011 to 2016, it at most contributed to only 3% of overall sales in its best sales year of 2013. This shouldn't be surprising considering 3-door SUVs have never been strong sellers for any automaker. What is surprising is what Land Rover decided to do next, the convertible. A concept of the convertible was presented in 2012, with the first production model created in November of 2015, and the first model sold for the 2017 model year. Unlike the Cross Cabriolet, which stowed its top in the trunk, the Evoque was more like the PT Cruiser in that it simply folded its top down over the greatly reduced trunk space. Although the hardtop could easily fit 2 bags of golf clubs, only one could fit in the convertible's trunk. Although the profile of the Evoque looked far cleaner than the Cross Cabriolet, with a clean straight belt line from front to rear, and better than the PT Cruiser's oversized basket handle between the seats, it still kind of looked like a minivan with its top cut off. Land Rover originally announced that the Evoque convertible would be low production, but I haven't found official production numbers. Considering Land Rover already had a second generation Evoque scheduled for the 2019 model year, starting up the convertible just 2 years earlier makes it clear they intended to only keep the convertible until the end of the 2018 model year. I suspect that unlike the Cross Cabriolet, the value of the Evoque convertible will eventually go higher than its original as-new price.
That can be reattached.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 70s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.